Well, good morning again, and welcome those of you who are here and who are watching us online, and happy Father's Day to all the fathers. You're awesome. We couldn't do half of what we do without you, so you are amazing in that regard. So today is our last week in our basic training series, and I've really enjoyed this series, so hopefully you have as well. I get the honor of starting it off and then finishing it, so it's come full circle for me this time. So a group of us yesterday went climbing at Mad River Gorge. And climbing has really become one of my most favorite things to do outside. I've been doing it for about 13 years. So this was me up on the rock yesterday. If you have the angle right, it looks like I'm really high. Just note for you, anybody that goes climbing, you got to get low enough so you can get a really good upward shot. When you rock climb, you have someone who does the climbing, and then someone below who is holding on the rope, and they are called the person that belays. I enjoy both aspects. I like climbing and I like belaying, but when you are the belayer, it's a little more stressful because you are the person who is keeping the other person on the wall up on the wall and not come crashing to the ground. So there's a little bit more weight and responsibility when you are the person belaying. So the last person to climb yesterday was Aaron, and he asked that I belay him. There were probably about 10, 11 people there, and out of everybody there, he said, "I want you to belay me." That's a lot of faith and trust in little old me, right? I mean, he had faith in me that I wouldn't drop him about 25 feet or more to the ground. He had trust that I was paying attention and listening to him when he would call out "take," which meant he needed a break for a minute. Now, in my defense, not only have I climbed, but I've also done this part many times, so I do know what I'm doing, but I take the task very seriously because it's a pretty serious job. And at one point when he says, "You got me, right? I'm taking. You got me." I said, "Look, I got you. If I let you fall, I have to preach more. You're good. I promise." So the route that he was cleaning was this one. So we were doing lead climbing, which means when you lead climb, there's no rope coming from the top. And so you have to climb up and clip in as you go. So Nathan had got all the way to the top, and when you get to the top to clean the route and get your stuff back, that means that at one point you are hooked on to just the little bolts up top and nothing else. And so there's a little bit of, I don't know about this, trusting in man-made objects to hold you steady, and there's also a significant amount of trust in the person who is at the bottom holding you on. And so again, this was a pretty tough route. And all of us who went up at one point, we got about halfway through, and like our muscles and our bodies just started shaking because we were exhausted. And so Aaron wasn't any different. He got about halfway up, and I see his one leg is just doing this. And there's a little part of me like, yeah, see, I don't feel so bad that my entire body was shaking at this point because his is doing it as well. And he probably wasn't shaking necessarily for fear purposes, but again, his muscles were just being used in such a capacity that they were physically shaking. And it struck me, I thought, he may be shaking upon this rock, but his faith that I have him is not. He still trusts me to get him back down safely. And see, there's a lot of times in life when you and I are going to be shaken to the core, much more so than just the legs shaking yesterday. We get shaken when we go to the doctor's office and hear the news that we dread. Or the moment we're at the kitchen table and we're looking at those bills that it's just not adding up. We get that phone call that we never want to get. We sit in the boss's office when he tells us, "I'm sorry, you're going to be laid off." Or that relationship that ended all of a sudden. These moments leave us shaken in life. But it is how we respond in the midst of these circumstances that ultimately define us, and they shape our faith. You see, we can let the tragedies we experience hold us captive, or we can use them to make us stronger. We can let our spirit be weakened, or we can let it cement our faith for good. So we're looking at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego this morning. I just want to warn you, it may get a little intense. It may get a little fired up. But I doubt we'll break out into a heated debate. But I promise you, this is one of the hottest places to be in Fairborn this morning. All right, I'm done. I worked really hard on every single one of those. I even left some out. So what stands out to me isn't necessarily the fire part. It isn't really even the fact that they made it out. I mean, that's an incredible miracle. I don't want to discount that. But what sticks out to me in the story is the faith that they had. A faith that was unshakable in the midst of an incredibly difficult situation. So I want to set the scene for us. We are in year 605 BC, just a couple years ago. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, he attacked and he conquered Judah. And following this victory, Nebuchadnezzar ordered that the best and the brightest young men from Judah be deported into Babylon. His plan was to train these men for 3 years and give them some positions in his royal court. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were among this group of men. So for 3 years, they were trained and brainwashed into Babylonian ways. Nebuchadnezzar wanted them and the others to be so indoctrinated into Babylonian culture that at the end of their training, they would think and act like Babylonians. They even changed their name. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's original names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You see, their Jewish names honor the Lord, but their new names honor the gods of the Babylonians. What Nebuchadnezzar didn't know was that he couldn't change their names, or he could change their names, but he could never change their hearts. Because as we will come to find out, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would remain loyal to the God of Israel no matter what. And so along the way, these men decide with their friend Daniel to not eat some of the provisions the king has set aside for them. The only things they were going to eat were vegetables, and the only thing they were going to drink was water. They did not want to defile themselves with this royal food. And so in the midst of all the training and everything they were going through, they continued to find favor within the royal court and are eventually appointed as administrators in the province of Babylon, which in the grand scheme of things isn't a bad gig for people who are in exile. So we pick up our story in chapter 3. This is verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then had people in his royal court dedicate the image and proclaim, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Sounds like a great day if you ask me. So first off, this structure that he has built is not small. It's 90 feet high, 9 feet wide. And it not only was big, but it was set up in the plain, so that you really couldn't miss it. You couldn't have the excuse, "I didn't see it. Are you going to find it?" And when the sounds came, the people knew what to do. And they were probably pretty loud. And so at this point, the horns blow, they make the sound, and everybody bows down. And in the middle of it, you see 3 men standing there, not budging. And so some people got really upset. And so some of the astrologers in King Nebuchadnezzar's court, they rat out Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They tell the king, "Look, these men pay no attention to you. They don't serve the king's God, and they did not bow down and worship. What are you going to do about it?" And so the king was furious to find out people in his administration, his leaders, weren't paying attention. They weren't following the rules. So they are brought before him, and he questions them. He says, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you don't serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now, hear this. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" So the king was kind of playing a little nice guy here. He's giving them a second shot. He didn't have to do this. He gives them a second chance. I mean, maybe they didn't hear the music playing. Maybe they were in the back of the crowd, and you know what? It wasn't as loud as it could be, and so they just didn't know. Maybe they had dust in their eyes, and so they didn't see that everybody else had bowed down. We'll give you a second shot to get this one right. I mean, these are some of the strongest, most intelligent men. He doesn't want to lose them. But we need to pause because these were young men who had hopes and dreams for the future. They dreamed of a day when they were back in their home and in their land. A day when they weren't being held by the Babylonians. A day when they could be free to do what they wanted to do. And even though they were in captivity, dying probably wasn't on their agenda that day. And so they had the kind of dilemma of all dilemmas. This isn't your typical cake or ice cream dilemma either. It's a little bit more than that. And in this moment, we need to understand they don't know the outcome. They aren't privy to the end of the story like we are. In this moment, this decision they are about to make, it was their reality. They don't know that God is going to come through and rescue them from the fire. All they know is they have a decision to make. They bow down and live, or stand firm and go out in a blaze of glory. Okay, I had one more, I'm sorry. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego reply to King Nebuchadnezzar in verse 16. And I love this statement. They said, we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. We don't need to listen to you. We don't serve you. So if you are watching, right? If you're watching this kind of story play out, this would be like the moment when you grab your popcorn and you just start eating because it's about to get really good, right? I mean, Steph Curry and popcorn. Doesn't get any better than that, right? So again, they basically tell the king, we don't report to you. You may be the king, Nebuchadnezzar, but you are not our king. And then they make one of the boldest statements in the Bible. Verse 17, they say, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. Every time I read this statement, I think, wow. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us. Not will save us, not even is going to save us, but they know that God can. God has the ability and the power to save them. But even if he doesn't, they will not bend. They don't go in knowing the outcome, but they go into the situation in this circumstance knowing God, and that's all that matters. Because they have full faith and trust regardless of the outcome. And nothing the king said to them changed their minds. So the rest of the story goes like this. King Nebuchadnezzar was quite upset, even more so than the time before. He ordered his men to heat the furnace 7 times hotter than usual. He then had his men tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the fire. And it was so hot that the men who escorted them there were killed because of the heat. And as the king watched the fire rage inside, he noticed something. Nothing was happening. Not only was nothing happening, but he asks what might be the best question in the Bible. I mean, can you see him? He's now counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. That can't be right. 1, 2, stop moving. 3, 4. He says, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw in the fire? I mean, like, I'm counting 4, but we threw in 3, right? Like, 1, 2, 3. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, that's 3. Yes, everybody agree. That is 3 people. Yes, okay. I don't see 3, I see 4. So they said, his advisor said, look, king, we promised. We only put 3 guys in there. And so he says, look, I see 4 men walking around the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. And so the king ordered the men to be brought out. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were brought out from the fire, and everybody crowded around because they wanted to know what happened. They saw the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. So the king then acknowledges the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he promotes them in his province of Babylon. So again, what sticks out the most to me in this story was the statement they made before going into the fire. Our God can save us, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to worship somebody else. And what's interesting to note is that the safest place for the 3 of these guys to be was in the fire with Jesus. Psalm 66:10 says, for you have tried us, O God. You have refined us as silver is refined. You see, it's in the fire that we are refined, we are developed, we are polished, and we are made new. It's in the fire that our faith is strengthened and solidified. And it's important to understand that these guys, they weren't superhuman. They weren't wearing fire-resistant clothing. They were regular people like you and like me. They just happened to have an absolutely unshakable faith. They didn't acquire this unshakable faith the day they stood before the king. They had gone through experiences that had left them shaken, but they didn't let those moments imprison them. Rather, they used them to cement their faith. They had endured the siege of their homeland, the captivity in Babylon, and now this persecution from the king. And it was during the 3 years that they were trained and brainwashed in their Babylonian culture that they did things to remind them of God. You know, they didn't eat the food or drink the wine the king gave them, if you recall. And those moments acted as daily reminders of who they were and where they came from. They relied on God's power in their lives to get them through on just veggies and water. This is another reminder, it's important to eat your veggie, kids. You see, they remembered the God who brought his people out from the land of Egypt, the God who saved them from the waters of the Red Sea, the God who led them to the promised land and who continued to fight for them every single day. They remembered hearing their ancestors talk about Moses and the 10 Commandments from God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not worship graven images. These reminders help them firmly cement their faith, their trust, their confidence in God for the moment when it was most necessary. Their unshakable faith allowed them to say with confidence to the king, you don't dictate who we worship. So I love asking questions. I started asking questions a while ago online, kind of the week or 2 weeks before I preach, just kind of to gauge where people were at, what you guys were thinking, and just to kind of help figure out where the sermon needs to go. So this week I asked the question, what does having an unshakable faith mean to you? And I got lots of really good answers, and so I pulled out a couple and I wanted to share them with you. The first one was trusting in God in the midst of an unspeakable tragedy and having faith that he will redeem. Unshakable faith is having faith in spite of silence, in spite of not hearing yes or no, in spite of your life not looking how you envisioned, and knowing that even when you cannot hear God, he is still working. Another one was the consistency and faithfulness in the little things that years later turn out to be big things that change the world. I like that one. And one more. Unshakable faith is knowing God can, but trusting when he says, wait. You see, having an unshakable faith doesn't have to involve tragedy or heartbreak. Sometimes it's trusting that our kids are going to be okay, that we did everything we could to raise them to be godly men and women. It's living with integrity and standing up for what's right, not bending in the face of pressure and persuasion. It's being willing to say, not my will, not my wants, not my anything, Lord. An unshakable faith stares into the eyes of the king and says, not today, not tomorrow, and not ever. So I don't know about you, but I want to have an unshakable faith. I want to live my every day with the trust and confidence that these 3 men had as they stood before the king and then walked into the fire. So I thought, what are some ways that we can prepare ourselves to have this kind of faith? So we have 3 keys to creating a foundation of unshakable faith. Does that sound good? You still with me? All right, sound good. All right, so here we go. The first key is to know God. So when I played softball in college, my coach had some really crazy tactics. There were moments that when I would play third base, he would actually shift me all the way over to like where shortstop was supposed to be at. I didn't understand why. Or there were other games when I would be playing center field and he would shift me the other way, and I felt like we now had 2 left fielders. I didn't understand what he was doing. I didn't understand why he was doing it, but every time he moved us, every time he told us to run or he called a play out, I mean, they worked. See, even though I didn't understand what he was doing, I trusted that he had our team's best interest in mind. I knew that he could see things on the field that I couldn't. And I had faith in his coaching every single game, regardless of whether we won or lost. That next game, I still trusted that he knew what he was doing. See, I was able to put my faith and trust and confidence in him because I knew him. I was with him day after day after day for 4 years. And I rarely, if ever, questioned his game management. You might even say I had unshakable faith in my coach. You see, in order to have unshakable faith in our life, we need to know and trust in the one to whom our faith is resting on. When we know God, it won't matter the circumstance, good or bad. We will be able to walk forward even when we don't know the destination. Now, this is much easier said than done, and it's much easier having it written down and saying it, right? But knowing God lessens our fears and increases our trust and confidence in the fact that he knows what he's doing way more than we do. You see, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they knew God. I mean, I love how the scripture put it. They said, our God is able to save us. He is able. He is capable to do this. They knew God was powerful, more so than the king. They knew God heard the cries of his people. They knew God was able to save them, but they also knew God in such a way that they knew it was his will that would prevail, not theirs. You see, because they knew God, they had a faith that was unshakable regardless of the outcome. Our God is able to save, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down. So, how do we know God? It's a good question, right? Well, the answer to that actually comes in the second key to having an unshakable faith, which is to practice the fundamentals. So fundamentals are basic principles, laws, rules that serve as groundwork for any kind of system. They are some of the essential parts. So when I coached, every day, every practice, every game, we had the girls do fielding and throwing fundamentals. So they would do this, so they were in constant practice, and it was always on their minds as they played. And the goal is to practice to the point of having those movements be almost instinctive, where you just don't have to think about it. The ball is hit, you immediately know what to do. You know where your glove's going to go. You know where you need to throw the ball. Again, fielding fundamentals, throwing fundamentals, game fundamentals, those things that are foundational to when you play. So we have the same thing with our faith. We can do the same to know God better. So the fundamentals of our faith are prayer, fasting, scripture reading, worship, and service. These things are fundamental to help us stay focused on the right things, and most importantly, God. So, find a time during the day to pray. If you're really bad at praying, take a minute. Start with a minute. And then move up, until you can go for 5 minutes, and then more and more. But when you begin to daily put this into practice, daily prayer, it is amazing what happens when life just throws you a curveball. You can fast from something. It doesn't have to be just during Lent. It's not for just those 40 days. You can fast from something. The 3 guys in our story, they fasted from certain foods and certain drinks. You can read scripture. Last week we had you do Matthew 5. How many of you read Matthew 5? Good work, good work. So if you didn't read Matthew 5 last week, here's another shot to read Matthew 5. There's lots of plans and various Bible apps. Find one. Start doing some of those fundamentals. Worship. Be here. If you're not here, be somewhere. That's fundamental to who we are. And the last one is, service. Find a place where you can give back. We got lots of places here to do that. So when we practice these things daily, we will be that much more prepared for whatever is ahead. And they may become instinctive in our life. So the last key to creating a foundation of unshakable faith is to avoid the excuses. This is the hard one. Because we make excuses often, whether we realize it or not. We rationalize our behavior to try to justify our often illogical actions with logical explanations, so everything makes sense and we feel better about what we're doing. Did you get that? You want to say it again? All right, I'll say it one more time. So we rationalize our behavior to try to justify our often illogical action with a logical explanation so that everything to us makes sense, and so we'll feel better about what we're doing. So recently I started working with a personal trainer, and this is where I noticed it most in my life. I started working with a trainer. I figured if I'm going to run 26 miles in September, I'd better train to run 26 miles in September. Seemed like a really good plan. So I've been working with him, and the good news is that the more I exercise, the more calories I burn, which means the more I get to eat. I like to eat. Some days I exercise so that I can eat all kinds of fun foods. But the bad thing is, sometimes I don't always eat the right food. And so this week, I was standing in the office, and we have some candy in a candy jar, and I grabbed the candy jar, and I pulled out a Snickers bar, and I looked at Cindy, and I looked at Laura, and I said, I'm going to eat this because I'm going to work out later. See, I rationalized why eating that Snickers bar was okay, because I knew that I would work it off. But the problem is that the more I do these, the more I rationalize my actions, the more I make excuses for things, the more I'm not helping my body train. And slowly, over time, if I never stop, I will end up compromising my efforts because I'm not putting the right stuff into my body. So we don't do this with just food. We do this with spending. There's often I come home from the grocery, and I'll tell John, I saved $32.99 at Kroger. I mean, I am so proud. And almost every time he says, but how much did you spend to get the $32.99 off? I'm like, that doesn't matter. I saved money. That's the point. We rationalize our spending. We rationalize and make excuses for our habits. I had a really bad day, and it's just one drink. It'll be okay. We rationalize our sin and our faith. Just this one time, because He'll forgive me later. I mean, I know this isn't what I am supposed to be doing. I should probably be in church, but, I am spending time with my kids at the game. Or I should read my Bible more, but, I'm really busy. I don't know where to start, or we go with, I know I sin, but my sin is certainly not as bad as her sin over there. I mean, did you see what she did? It is way worse than what I'm doing. I mean, I look like the golden child in comparison. You see, we make excuses with a lot of stuff in life. We make illogical actions that we try to make logical so that we can feel better about ourselves. And most of the time, these are seemingly harmless, but the danger is when we make one excuse, we can do it twice. When we excuse twice, we can do it 3 times, so on and so forth. When we begin to do this, we rationalize our behavior and our actions and our circumstances. And when we do this, we go closer and closer and closer to accepting standards that are lower than what they should be. And when this happens, our lives have become so compromised that we find ourselves logically explaining why we need to bow down to a 90-foot statue made of gold. See, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had all the opportunity to make an excuse to bow down to the statue. They could have said, well, guys, we're in a really bad spot. It's life or death here. What if we just make it look like we're going to bow down? We're not really going to do it, but we'll make them think we are. Or they could have said, this is a foreign land. God will excuse us because we got to follow the customs. I mean, everybody else is doing it. We're going to look like, 3 goofballs just standing out here. But they didn't make any excuse at all. They didn't try to rationalize why bowing down would be okay. They didn't lower their standards or compromise their faith. Instead, they stuck to their convictions, clung tight to their faith, and told the king to take a hike. So we can avoid excuses and rationalizations by checking our heart. By saying, is this something I need or is this something I want? Is this really going to make me happier? I mean, can I really not live without this? We can take ownership for our responsibilities, our actions, our behavior. Instead of making an excuse for when we mess up, we can say, you know what? I screwed up. I made a mistake. Instead of rationalizing why we acted in that certain way, we can simply say, I was wrong and my behavior was out of line. We can avoid doing this by standing firm in our convictions. And this is simply knowing where we stand and not lowering our standards to fit the desires of others. Ladies, I want you to listen to me. We don't have to lower our standards to fit the mold and desires of what society tells us. Ever. We don't have to fit the box that they put us in. We don't have to fit the clothes that are at that clothing store just because somebody made them. We don't have to lower our standards. We can stand firm with who we are and who God created us to be. Be unshakable in your self-confidence. And the last one is we can seek advice of others. Ask them, what do you think I should do here? I just want to run something by you. I don't want to just kind of rationalize how this is going to work out. I want to see what you are going to think. So when we begin to focus on knowing God, practicing the fundamentals, and avoiding the excuses, we will have the start of a great foundation of unshakable faith. So there was one more response to the question that I asked online. It was by far the one that blew me away the most. So I asked it both on Facebook and on Twitter. And I have different people that kind of follow me and I'm connected with on both. And there was one that I wanted to make sure that you heard. So some of you know Tom Kirsch. For those of you who don't, Tom is a teacher at the high school, and he and his wife Wendy, who is also a teacher, they've made some incredibly impactful moments for lives of students in our community. They are some incredible leaders that have done some amazing things. Less than 3 weeks ago, Wendy passed away suddenly. And so I opened up Twitter the other day, and there was a response from Mr. Kirsch. And I want you to hear these words from a man who just lost his wife. He answered the question, what does it mean to have unshakable faith? He said it means to stand fast in the Lord, His faithfulness and good and perfect will in the face of an unimaginable future. This man was shaken to the core less than 3 weeks ago, and yet is able to make this statement. He may be shaken, but his faith is not. Because you can't make a statement like that with a shakeable faith. I mean, this is the kind of faith that you and I are called into. One that holds on with everything we have, even when life doesn't make sense. Even when we are climbing that uphill battle and the fire is raging around us. This is the kind of faith that God wants us to have. I pray that we are people who can stand firm even though we have been thoroughly shaken in life. I pray that we can be people who practice the fundamentals and avoid making excuses for everything we do. And I pray that we know God and put our full faith and trust in Him. I pray we can be able to say like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I know my God is able to save me. I know He can rescue me. But even if He doesn't, I will not waver, and I will not move, and I will not worship another God. And I pray that you and I can have a faith that when we are faced with an unimaginable future, an unknown destination, we can put our faith and our hope and our trust in God to say, my faith has led me to the point where I stand fast. And His faithfulness and good and perfect will is before me, even though my future is unimaginable. So may we stand fast in the Lord, in good and in bad times. May we trust His faithfulness, His good and perfect will, in the face of an unimaginable future. Amen. We get the honor of celebrating communion together. And this is always a joy because communion allows us to come into moments where we experience the grace of God firsthand. Because reality is you and I, we don't deserve the grace that we get. I wish we did, but we don't. And yet God has done something for us so that we can receive that grace and we can come into His presence in this moment.